It wasn't too long ago that wide receiver Davante Adams got exactly what he wanted when he was traded from the Green Bay Packers to the Las Vegas Raiders. However, he may be having some remorse about getting exactly what he wanted, and it may be a good lesson for Brandon Aiyuk to study. That and more on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, everybody, to this Friday episode of Locked On NFL, your daily podcast covering the National Football League, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen or your first view today and every day. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are getting this podcast. I am David Harrison, and if you're thinking that Tony Wiggins looks and sounds a little bit different on today's episode, that's because Tony Wiggins is not here for today's episode. He's a little bit busy doing some really important Jaguars work, so make sure you check out Locked On Jags if you want to catch up with Tony over there. But we got Lauren Cox, host of Locked On Bears, coming through to help us out on this Friday episode. Of course, Locked On NFL is here with you every Monday through Friday, even when Tony can't be here, even when I can't be here. Locked On NFL is going to be here with you and every dayers. You know that, so we appreciate you for coming through every day as well. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find your qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Of course, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And on today's episode, we are going to go through the most valuable rookies as rookies start to report to training camp at the end of this week, waiting for their veterans to come in next week. And then football is back. Football is pretty much all the way back, just about, preseason football, but it's still football. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the top Brandon Aiyuk landing spots, potentially, if the 49ers cave and decide to trade their star and disgruntled wide receiver. But first, Lauren, we're going to start by talking about Davante Adams, because the Davante Adams situation, for one, is very intriguing. For two, it's a very important lesson, I think, for other NFL players in general, but specifically wide receivers, because Davante is a wide receiver and one of the best in the league, to getting what they want, right? And we've all heard the saying, be careful what you ask for, because you might just get it. Well, Davante grew up a Raiders fan, always knew he wanted to play for the Raiders someday. Decided he and A-Rod, they were going to go their separate ways. A-Rod went to the Jets. So Davante took his opportunity, essentially forced his way to the Las Vegas Raiders. And it appears now, Lauren, that there might be some buyer's remorse there. So what do we know so far of what's going on with Davante Adams this offseason?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how when the initial trading out of Green Bay happened, there was a lot of silence around this, and kind of like all we got was snippets of, maybe Davante Adams just wanted to be a Raider and wasn't really an anti-Packers thing, or maybe how much of it was about Aaron Rodgers. And slowly, like, just for some reason this year, years later now this summer, Davante Adams has been more willing to reveal some of the details there about what went down in Green Bay and some of the offers that were back and forth there. And obviously we knew all along that he wanted to be a Raider, like you said, and also wanted to be united with Derek Carr, his college teammate at Fresno State. Like, it made a lot of sense. I mean, it was strange, but like we could kind of piece together logically, okay, like it makes sense as he's getting a little bit later in his career, and Green Bay's kind of in a transition period anyway. Like, it made sense for both sides at the time that Davante Adams could kind of go where he wanted to go. But then all of a sudden, the quarterback changes in Las Vegas, and it's not the guy he had gone to sign up for. Obviously, they ended up having to make a coaching change as well in that process, and now it's not the Raiders that Davante Adams came to. But I think what I find most interesting about this is, like, throughout this process, the Raiders have given Adams a lot of power. Like, you talk about the lesson for Brandon Aiyuk and the wide receivers that might want to get traded and not end up getting what they want. But the lesson for the Raiders as well, they bring in Davante Adams, and they kind of have him have a say in personnel decisions. He's a big reason why Antonio Pierce is still the head coach there. He and the other players touched for Pierce to still be there. So Adams got the coach he wanted, but couldn't get to keep the quarterback he wanted. Like, it's kind of weird. I don't know if they just didn't go all in enough on Adams or went all in too much on Adams. But either way, It feels like the end is nearer rather than farther away.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it is. I think it's a cautionary tale, right? And I think that it's just, I remember when the trade happened, and I remember saying to people, like, look, like, given being put in the same position, if I had the power to go exactly where I wanted, work for the exact company or whatever franchise within my business that I want to, I can't say I wouldn't do the same thing, right? Like, I think a lot of us would have done the same thing. But at the same time, you kind of look at it, you're like, man, like, look at what you got. And, Davante is not responsible for what Aaron Rodgers does, but it's like, look at what you guys broke up. I know they only won one Super Bowl together. You know what I mean? But very competitive team, obviously Super Bowl, contenders year in and year out. And arguably, if Tom Brady doesn't make the jump to the NFC, maybe the Packers have another Super Bowl with that 2-0. All I know, Lauren, is that hiring Josh McDaniels is basically just poison to any franchise. So no franchise should ever do it again as a head coach, because now both the Broncos and the Raiders have learned the hard way. And I think, the Colts, they kind of dodged that bullet. But let's talk about potential ramifications, but resolutions to this Davante Adams situation. So now obviously the conversation is, will the Raiders, or could Davante force himself, or however it comes to be, could Davante end up with the Jets, back with A-Rod? What are your thoughts on that storyline?
Yeah, so, host of Lockdown Raiders, your boy Q, was on with Peter Burkowski on Lockdown Sports Today yesterday and talked a little bit about this, where he's like, Davante Adams, like, right now is fairly happy. I mean, like, he has a great relationship with Antonio Pierce, and Q said, like, he and Aiden O'Connell are good friends. Like, they get along well. So, like, it's not that Davante Adams is right now putting his foot down saying, I want to be out of here, put me with Aaron Rodgers. But Q kind of conceded, like, hey, well, what happens if it's week 6 and the Raiders are 1-5 or 2-4, and O'Connell's having trouble getting the ball to Davante Adams? And you might get along well and have a good relationship and be friends, but if Adams isn't having the kind of production that he wants and the offense isn't producing as well as he wants, because Aiden O'Connell is far from a proven quarterback and certainly far from Aaron Rodgers. Like, this feels to me like something that isn't going to resolve today, but all of the seeds have been planted now, to where I think we're all just looking at the clock, the calendar, wondering when the trade is going to happen, just not maybe right away. It's kind of like when we talk about rumors that a head coach is going to be fired, and then we kind of know that it's going to happen eventually. It's just a matter of when that happens. And it feels more like a potential trade deadline deal, but Davante Adams' salary doesn't make this very easy either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously the Jets, they've got a lot of incentive to kind of go all in, right? And try to get, Aaron Rodgers, like, you don't trade for Aaron Rodgers thinking like, man, we've got a decade to put this thing together. No, you trade for Aaron Rodgers thinking we've got a few years to put this thing together. So if that's the move that maybe they want to make, and maybe they're willing to take on some of that salary, maybe give up a little less draft capital in exchange for doing that, all these things. What really surprised me, Lauren, you touched on it a couple of times, is that it is kind of a known thing. Like, he's an Antonio Pierce guy, right? And Antonio Pierce is kind of in this situation where there's some people out here wondering, like, could the Raiders do him dirty if this season doesn't go well, given what's happened around the organization, given the roster he's dealing with? Given the quarterback situation he's dealing with, could they do him dirty and run him out of town if, I don't know, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady want to come to Vegas for one more ride or something kind of crazy? That's a what if. That's not a report. That's a what if. So just take that with a grain of salt. But there's been some Davante Adams, Tom Brady, talk as well. And now, of course, there's all these clips coming out. I saw a clip earlier of him being frustrated after Jimmy Garoppolo missed him on a wide open route on the left side of the field and being frustrated. So all those things are kind of coming out, right? And the biggest thing for me, I've always said, is from covering these NFL teams, once news and reports start making it public, or once players start saying things public, the thing I always remind myself is, every player in this business, at least established one especially, has already said this stuff internally before they ever say it externally. In fact, I would say they probably said it internally 3 times before they ever say anything externally. So for Davante Adams, like, if he's saying this stuff publicly now, and again, he's not out here like just throwing the organization completely under the bus or anything, but airing some frustrations publicly, it's been aired in closed doors. You can believe that it's been aired in closed doors. So it'll be interesting to see how this thing unfolds. And then finally, Lauren, Brandon Aiyuk, you know what I mean? He wants to get paid. He says he wants to be a part of the franchise. Now, obviously, he's officially requested a trade, but he said before he wants to stay with the 49ers. Is there something that Brandon Aiyuk, in your opinion, should be pulling from this situation with Davante Adams? And how, if at all, do you think it should change the way that Brandon is approaching his situation in San Francisco?
So you can go somewhere and get traded to a team that's going to be willing to pay you the big money, but like Davante Adams, maybe it doesn't end up being where you want it to be, but you get the big contract, or maybe you can stay where you want to be, but that team can't afford to give you as big of a contract as maybe that other location. So what's going to be more important to you, the money or the situation? And that's a lot for those players to balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to dive deeper into the Brandon Aiyuk situation here in just a second. We're going to identify 2 teams each. One of these teams, Brandon could actually find himself still a Super Bowl contender, maybe paid, and actually happier than Davante Adams is right now. But my prediction, or my projection, it may take him a little bit, and he may find himself in some Davante Adams type waters. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships, but it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. We're talking superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your vehicle, so you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Locked On NFL is also brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality candidates who are right for the role. And that's why you need LinkedIn Jobs, because they have the tools that find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. The key is that LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who might not be actively searching for a job right now, but they could be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
During the week, San Francisco 49ers disgruntled star wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk officially requested a trade. That news coming from Mike Garafolo of NFL Network. We're going to dive into what that means and who could be some potential suitors for Brandon Aiyuk to land with if a trade is to happen. Thanks for making Locked On NFL your first listen or your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through like you always do. Of course, Locked On NFL will also be back on Monday with Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens getting our week started. It's training camp week. So, we got a lot of things to talk about. But if you can't wait that long, you just need more sports content. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day. And again, it's free 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Just another part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Lauren, we already talked a little bit about Brandon Aiyuk, how this situation with Davante Adams really could serve as kind of a directing point. So I'm not saying that Brandon Aiyuk necessarily needs to look at Davante Adams and say, I just need to completely go the opposite direction of him. But I do think it's important information just to kind of take in and just learn from other people's experiences, right? I look back at Le'Veon Bell and, he came out, somewhat recently and kind of talked about his experience and leaving the Pittsburgh Steelers and all that contract stuff and like how relatively little money it actually was when he looks back on it that he and the Steelers are kind of fighting over, and how he almost kind of wishes he would have just stuck it through and all those things. But again, everybody's got to make their own decisions. At the end of the day, Brandon Aiyuk has done what he's done. He's requested his trade. Lauren, what do you think overall of the trade request? Were you surprised by it? And one way or the other, if there's a team out there where you're like, man, this team needs to bring Aiyuk in, or man, this is the perfect team for Aiyuk to get everything he wants, have his cake and eat it too, what team are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where we kind of forgot that he hadn't formally requested a trade yet, because I think the idea of a Brandon Aiyuk trade has been a conversation since, I remember during the draft, and I think before draft is when this conversation really started. Yeah. And so like him formally requesting a trade at first was a little bit like, wait a minute, am I reading an old story here? And I was like, oh, actually, no, he never had formally done that. We had just all been kind of talking about it behind the scenes. But it doesn't surprise me that, okay, now that training camp is here, I will make my request formal. And let's just kind of cut this out so that when he shows up, it's very clear. Or, if he shows up to training camp, I guess this could be the time that you choose to hold out and not participate. But it's very clear where he stands, what he wants. And this is kind of his last leverage play, is to kind of formally demand that trade. But other than holding out, like that's all he has under his arsenal. So now the ball is certainly in the 49ers court to try and appease him in some way, shape, or form, whatever that ends up looking like, to prevent a holdout or to keep him around or to give him a contract or whatever that's going to be. But I can't help but think if I'm a team that's really close to contending, or I'm a contending team, but I just have a slight gap at wide receiver, that I would be lining up to go to the 49ers and say, like, this is not just a surefire 1,000-yard type receiver that come in, but a young one as well, someone who can be cornerstone receiver for your franchise. So like if I'm the Baltimore Ravens and I want to get that one more weapon for Lamar Jackson to really kind of open things up, they've struggled to find that playmaking wide receiver. They tried the Odell Beckham thing, and that had some success there, but like Aiyuk can really be a dynamic weapon for them in that offense and just put them that much over the top to beat the Chiefs in the arms race here. And I'll throw the Buffalo Bills in there as well after they lost Stephon Diggs. Like one of these kind of teams that they're very close, but they haven't been able to push through and really win it all. Like, can Aiyuk be that piece where you might have to restructure some of your own contracts to make the money work, but it's Super Bowl or bust right now. So go get that receiver to put yourself over the top.
Yeah. I really like the Baltimore Ravens fit. I don't like the Bills fit as much because of the Bills. Like for Aiyuk, I think it makes a lot of sense. And actually on paper, it makes a lot of sense for the Bills. Like if I'm running the Bills on Madden, I'm going and running to trade for Brandon Aiyuk. The problem I have with that matchup is I think the Bills are on the downhill slide. Like I think 5 years from now, Lauren, this is a little bit of a hot take, but 5 years from now, I don't think Coach McDermott is going to be there anymore. And I don't think Josh Allen might be there anymore. Like this Bills team in 5 years from now can look completely different than it looks right now. When you talk about a team that just like last year, the year before, were considered a top contender in the AFC, that would be a little bit surprising to most, I guess. But that's the only reasons I don't want to see Brandon Aiyuk land in that Buffalo Bills, what I think is a little bit more of a mess than maybe. And I might be making too much of it, but the Baltimore Ravens situation would be probably the most advantageous for Brandon because again, like you just said, you get to be on a Super Bowl contender. You still have a really good quarterback. I think in a lot of ways, Lamar is a better quarterback, right, than Brock Purdy. I don't think people will really argue that too much. The situation I'm going to put him in, I'm going to just flat out admit that it's a completely selfish one because like Brandon Aiyuk, I'm an Arizona State Sun Devil. Unlike Brandon Aiyuk, I am on the beat here in Washington. So I want to bring Brandon Aiyuk to Washington. I want him to rejoin Jaden Daniels, former Sun Devil, great. I know he was greater as an LSU Tiger. I got it. But former Arizona Sun Devil, great Jaden Daniels. They're best friends, as everybody has noticed during this offseason of social media exploits and all these things. And the Washington Commanders use another weapon. I mean, I think Brandon Aiyuk comes in, and I think most people, if Brandon Aiyuk comes in immediately, everybody outside of Washington says he's wide receiver 1. Terry McLaurin is now 2. Jahan Dotson is now 3. I think everybody in Washington probably leans more Terry McLaurin, Brandon Aiyuk, 1A, 1B. Jahan Dotson is the 3. But however you want to label it, I don't care. I think it makes the Washington Commanders offense a little bit more dynamic from a production standpoint. Cliff Kingsbury would absolutely love to have 2 guys with that kind of a talent and Jahan Dotson's capabilities. The problem you have there, I think this is the Davante Adams door, right? Like this is the potential Davante Adams door. Brandon Aiyuk gets what he wants. I get to go reunite with my buddy, right? For Davante, it was Derek Carr. For Brandon, it's Jaden Daniels. I get paid. I'm going to get my check. I'm going to do that. But 3 years from now, are you going to be happy with the state of the franchise? That's going to be the question. Now, I do think if you compare the Commanders and the Raiders at like these equal standpoints, like when they got Davante and when they would quote unquote get Brandon if this happened, I do think the Commanders kind of are pointing just upwards more. I don't think they're higher up than the Raiders were, right? But I think their future looks brighter just because they have so much flexibility. Even if they gave Aiyuk a new contract, they'd still have at least $75 million in salary cap space next year. That's with a brand new top 5 wide receiver contract to Brandon Aiyuk. So, I mean, that's not a problem at all. The question would be draft compensation. So not the immediate contendership situation and picture that Aiyuk would be looking for, but I think that it gives him what he wants. Plus, if the Washington Commanders do become a contender, people are going to look at Brandon Aiyuk and say you were a reason they became a contender. Whereas with Baltimore, they were already a contender. You maybe were the reason you made them better, but they were already good without you. And I think from a ego legacy standpoint, it would serve Brandon better. And it supports my point better as well for him to go to Washington.
Well, but to bring that full circle, like if he wanted to just play for the best contender, he would stay in San Francisco, right? Like that would be the easiest way.
I mean, right?
If his goal is I want to win Super Bowls, are you that much better off leaving San Francisco? I mean, Baltimore or any of these contending teams, like they're at best going to be pretty equal with San Francisco.
What has really surprised me in this whole thing, honestly, and again, this is only one side of the story, so it's not confirmed and it's not the whole story clearly. But according to the trade request reports, part of the reason the trade request has come through now is because the 49ers haven't even been willing to go to the negotiating table since May. So it's a little bit surprising for me that general manager John Lynch, former NFL player himself, a player that once requested his own release from the Denver Broncos because of lack of playing time, is not willing to come to the table, just have a conversation while OTAs and mini camps and things like that are are going on. That would be surprising if, ever proved completely 100% true that John Lynch is not willing to have the conversation. But we do know that there's a team out there in New York who is more than willing to have conversations with their players because they are basically letting one of their players run their roster management decisions and organization in quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Why one of his new teammates is the most important non-NFL or non-quarterback rather rookie this NFL season. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of Locked On NFL is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy that's here to help you be your best self. Especially in the modern day of social media, we find ourselves doing a lot of comparison. You see other people's lives and think everything is so much better for them, and then you start to feel worse about your own life. I mean, it really is true that comparison is the thief of joy. But therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can really start living your best life. I do online therapy every single week, and it's a really important part of my own personal health regimen. And that's why I recommend you try out BetterHelp to get your own benefits from therapy. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/locked on to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on.
Wrapping up this Friday episode here on Locked On NFL, and we are going to talk about rookies. So rookies all across the National Football League are reporting as we speak, or they already did today, or they're going to tomorrow, whenever it is for each and every team, or they already have this week. Rookies are reporting this week. Training camp officially gets started for them. I don't think the technical training camp date starts until later, but their training camp experience, whatever you want to call it, is going to start for them. Veterans, of course, are reporting next week, and that's where all of us nosy media people will be all up in their business, trying to figure out everything that's going on about them. And so Lauren got us thinking, of all the rookies out here, we know the quarterbacks, right? Jane Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May, JJ McCarthy, all these guys are super important to their franchises, especially the success they will or won't have in the near to distant future. But what about the non-quarterbacks? Which non-quarterback in your mind, rookie, is the most important and most critical to his team's near and long-term future?
Yeah, I'll take the low-hanging fruit here with the first non-quarterback taken in the draft, although I do have another one later on in the first round that we can talk about too. But I mean, there's a good reason Marvin Harrison Jr. was taken fourth overall and that he was the first non-quarterback. But I also think not only just the pure talent that we all saw him as, one of the best wide receivers in this draft and someone who can be a dynamic game changer for whatever team took him, but specifically applying him to what Arizona has and what Arizona needs and what they've surrounded. Like so much of that team's immediate and long-term success is going to be getting Kyler Murray back to, MVP caliber type of moments that we've seen from him earlier in his career. And they've done a really good job of rebuilding that offensive line. They took Paris Johnson in the first round last year and have invested some free agent dollars there, brought in Jonah Williams. Now they've got a couple of really good young tight ends in Trey McBride, and they just drafted Tip Ryman. Backfield's got, James Conner, and they drafted Trey Benson and DJ Dallas. They got the running game. They got some tight ends. They got some offensive linemen. And now Marvin Harrison is that like piece on top as that bona fide number one receiver, demands double coverage on the outside. It takes less pressure than on Michael Wilson, who's a very good receiver, but maybe not that caliber of guy. And Zay Jones and Greg Dortch and Zach Pascal, like they can be good complementary pieces. But if you had an offense full of those, just like complementary pieces, like it makes such a difference to give Kyler Murray that one more big piece on top that is going to be that favorite weapon for him for the next 10 years or however long Kyler Murray's career continues to go from here. And then, his development is going to be so critical. Yeah, maybe the defense still needs to catch up a little bit here and there, but as long as you can get Murray back on track, then the whole franchise is heading in that direction. Whereas if Murray were to stumble, perhaps because you didn't give him a receiver like Marvin Harrison, then maybe, Jonathan Gannon and the coaching staff starts to get in the hot seat and change everything out. And then all of a sudden the franchise is turning over all sorts again.
Yeah. It's really interesting to look at the wide receiver position for this conversation. And I honestly actually almost went with Malik Neighbors myself, the New York Giants rookie wide receiver kind of thing. Like if the Giants are going to make anything of this Daniel Jones situation, Malik Neighbors is going to be a big part of that. And I do think that is the case. And I'll be honest with you, Lauren, what took me off of Malik Neighbors was watching that exact clip. Like when I was getting ready for this episode, I was looking at Davante Adams stuff. I saw that clip where dude is wide the heck open, and Jimmy Garoppolo just doesn't find him. And it kind of reminded me of a conversation Terry McLaurin had recently where he talked about receivers being an incredibly dependent position. And, you got to have the scheme and you got to have the quarterback and all these other things. So a great wide receiver, while I think in your situation with the Arizona Cardinals, like you said, there's good pieces around him already. So Marvin Harrison really could be the catalyst of lifting that team up. I look at Malik Neighbors, I'm like, man, there's not a lot of good pieces around there. So I don't know if you could really be that catalyst. You might just be a building block for the future, and other people are going to need to come in around you. So that's why I came off the wide receiver position with Malik Neighbors. That's also why I didn't go necessarily Roma Dunze because of the relative unknown. Obviously, Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears can tell you more about the situation with Caleb Williams and Roma Dunze in Chicago. So make sure you check that out. But I'm going to go with a guy that may not even start his NFL career, Lauren. I'm going to go with Olu Fashanu, the offensive lineman out of the New York Jets organization, because there are some people who look at him and say he's not going to start. He's going to be the swing tackle to start his career. There's some people that say he's going to earn a starting job. And I don't necessarily know what Robert Saleh's take on it is right now. But at the end of the day, it's because the protection of Aaron Rodgers is going to be the make or break function for whether or not this New York Jets team is going to be a championship contender like they thought they were going to be last year when they made the trade in the first place. Davante Adams or no Davante Adams, if you don't have Aaron Rodgers, you're dead in the water for the New York Jets. So that pass protection is going to be important. But also, sticking to the criteria of the segment, moving into the future, I think no matter what Tyron Smith does right now, no matter what Morgan Moses does right now, Olu Fashanu obviously is expected to be part of the future of that tackle position for the New York Jets, whether that starts this year or it starts next year or whenever it begins. So because of that, Olu Fashanu, for whoever the next quarterback is, also maybe Aaron Rodgers. I mean, even if he's a swing tackle, like that's still an important position on an NFL franchise. So I don't want to undersell that too much either. But I think Olu Fashanu really kind of represents the marrying of how do we make sure we capitalize on what we have today, but also how do we start building a platform for success in the future with the New York Jets organization.
It feels like the offensive tackle in the first round that's like most critical to their quarterback's well-being in that. I mean, because of the fragility that Aaron, not that he's like always been a fragile guy, but given at his age, like no one else has a more important job to like specifically be the one that helps keep their quarterback healthy than Olu Fashanu. The one other name I'll throw out here that I think is not going to be at the top of anybody's list, but I think is a sneaky name is Jared Verse from the Los Angeles Rams. Like Rams get cut back. That offense is ready to keep rolling. They're still trying to win, football games as a win now type team. But you lose Aaron Donald on defense. How do you try and replace him? I mean, you got other defensive tackles you like, but your pass rush is going to rely on Jared Verse on one side, and Braden Fiske is going to be part of that conversation as well on the interior. Trying to fill the void of Aaron Donald is impossible for any rookie to come in and do, but like that defense is going to be incredibly reliant on those first two draft picks together to try and be their primary source of pass rush. And that's a lot of pressure, but if they can do it, I mean, that's a real value to that team being able to get back into real contention and not just be a fringe wild card team like they were last year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll tell you, you could also, if you want to stick in the tackle category, you could go Joe Alt with the Los Angeles Chargers and Justin Herbert. If Justin's going to, produce on the field as far as like wins and playoff runs and all that stuff, the way that his reputation and the national media kind of loves him for, certainly that tackle position is going to be incredibly important, even if he doesn't have the same weapons that he's had recently. So definitely some important rookies out there that are not necessarily playing the quarterback position, even though that is, of course, the most important position on the football field. Training camp is next week. Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens is going to kick off our new week of Locked On NFL coverage. So make sure you come back for that. Subscribe, turn on the auto downloads, all that stuff for your second listen of the day. Check out Locked On Bears, check out Locked On Commanders, or stay right here and head over to Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live stream live sports stream on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. For Lauren Cox and David Harrison, we will see you next Friday for another episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.